Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the Center for Healing podcast. This morning, I'm with Lael Stone, and I'll let you introduce yourself, but I'm very excited to talk to Lael. I've done a few of her courses on parenting, and she's quite well known. I've actually seen you on the news as well in the morning
Yes.
show. Yeah, so she's quite well known in the field and has done some amazing stuff. I think you also own a school,
Yeah,
correct?
I created a school.
Edit
Yes.
store.
Yep.
Yeah, wonderful. I wish we lived near that. My kids would
Yep.
be going there. So very excited to have you here today. And welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. It's lovely to be here. I can do my really brief kind of intro. So I've worked with families for over 20 years now. I actually started as a childbirth educator a long time ago. So I started working in birth and began to clearly see the impact of trauma on birth with people. So I moved a lot into as a childbirth educator and a doula, and then started doing a lot of postnatal trauma work. So working with families that had had tricky birth experiences, because we know how much that can impact that whole parenting journey. And from there, I moved into working with aware parenting, which is a style of parenting that really is about non punitive discipline, listening to feelings, helping babies heal from stress and trauma. So I worked with that for a long time, working one on with families and running workshops. And then as my own children grew, I found myself somehow working with teenagers, teaching sex education to teenagers, which was by a complete accident, really. I went in to go and do a chat to the teenagers on birth because one of the coordinators was like, "Can you come and talk to them?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then all of a sudden, I was like, actually, they need a whole lot more information than this. I spent about 5 years working in secondary schools teaching sex education and really around connection to self and body. From there, I then ended up creating Woodline Primary with another woman, a school that is based in just out of Geelong in Victoria. And we are a beautiful farm school, around 20 acres there. And we are all about emotional intelligence and trauma informed education. So, really around choice and autonomy for children, really inviting them to learn in the way that feels good for them. We're a play based learning school, so really understanding the healing power of play for children to not only learn but to process life. And we are a school that welcomes feelings. So, it is okay to be angry, it's okay to be sad. And we have a lot of adults there to hold space for kids for whatever they need to work with and process. So, we're in our fifth year now, Woodline. And I've written two books. One, Raising Resilient, Compassionate Children, which has been around for a few years, and my second book called Own Your Story is coming out in about 2 months. And these days, I spend a lot of my time traveling all over Australia, speaking. I speak a lot to parents and educators, but also a little bit more in the corporate sector around emotional awareness and intelligence and understanding our own imprints and stories. And my most important job is I'm a mum, three beautiful humans. So they are now 25, 21, and 17. I always say, no matter what I've studied or learnt, being a parent has been the most humbling and powerful experience in learning and growth ever for me. So, I think everything I've learned, I've tested on my kids to try and figure out how to raise them with as much awareness as possible. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's who I am.
amazing. Thanks for sharing. And so that a few questions came to mind, like of things, kind of trajectories that we can kind of go on, rabbit holes. The first one was around birth trauma. What was the thing that made you kind of get into that? And also, like, I'd love to dive into the impact
Yeah.
that you've seen that have on people, have on mothers, the way their relationship is with their child after that, and also the child later in life, because
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
really reverberate.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure, it absolutely can. Well, I got into birth really because of my own birth experiences, because I had a traumatic birth with my son. I was
Mm.
25 when I had him, really naive, young. I was like, how hard can this be? It's just surely a day. I knew nothing. I didn't have any real support with me. I mean, I had my husband, but we were like the blind leading the blind. We had no idea.
Mm.
Um, and I came out the other side of his experience, just like what happened to me. Like I couldn't make sense of what happened. And I spent probably the first year of his life, as I look back now, understanding, probably had PTSD that I just did
Yeah.
not, nobody could address. So I would relive the experience every time I would go to feed him. I was on high alert a lot. I was just in shock, actually, for a good year of his life. And it wasn't until I got pregnant for the second time that, that the idea of birth really started to terrify me again. And I'd go to my antenatal checkups and I'd just be shaking. I'd be sitting there like shaking, and my husband's like, Lael, I think you've got some trauma here. So I went and did a little bit of counseling, and then actually discovered another way to give birth, which was actually with some beautiful continuity of care. So I found a really amazing midwife and a home birth doctor and chose to have my second baby at home, which was a really powerful experience because it met all the places and needs that weren't met in that first birth, which is that relationship, that emotional safety, the physical safety, being able to trust my body and being able to have people around who could just hold me and wherever I was at. So I gave birth to my second child, my beautiful daughter, in the lounge room and in the water. And it was one of the most powerful things I have ever done in my life. I gave birth and I just was like, wow, this is what it's meant to feel like. I just felt deeply in love and powerful and just extraordinary. I felt like I just climbed Mount Everest, and I just wanted the whole world to know. And I could not believe the contrast, and also just what it did for me stepping into that threshold of motherhood for the second time. So because of that, I was like, whoa, I just got drawn into working into this field. I wasn't working in birth at the time, and I just was like, I want to know more. I want to support other people to have powerful experiences. And so that's when I trained to become a doula and a childbirth educator, because I thought, wow, just like me all those years ago, I was so naive. I had no idea. I'm guided by what we see on television or in the media around birth, which is that birth is an emergency, and it's, you should be terrified and you're just going to scream at your partner. And like, there's a whole lot more to it. It's an extraordinary thing that your body's designed to do. And when we are supported and we have the right education, and it can be one of the most powerful things we do as women to step into that next role of mother. So I threw myself into working in birth, and what was interesting is after that second powerful experience, I just thought, wow, if you just do this, this, and this, then you'll get a great experience. And then I quickly realized that there's actually a lot more to it than just that. And really, I was pretty humbled. 4 years after my second child, I had another child, and this time I ended up with an emergency cesarean because I had an undiagnosed breech birth, and that was a whole other journey as well that
Yeah.
really unfolded a lot for me. So I have learned about birth over all these years and listening to thousands of stories. There is no right or wrong within birth, and each mother, each baby, each family is going to have their own unique journey. But what we can do is we can try to help them feel as safe as possible in that journey, give them the information they need to understand and make informed choices, and be as present as possible for this experience. So, I absolutely, having had three completely all different births, have zero judgment around birth. I just think sometimes our babies choose how they want to be born. We can do all the right things, and then our babies are like, actually, this is how I want to come into the
Yeah.
world. But what I did really begin to see as I worked a lot with families is that often what played out in the birth was not unique. So the themes that often turned up for women in birth, or and for partners as well, were often connected to the themes that have been there in their lives. So whether it was not feeling heard, whether it was not being supported, whether it was acquiescing your power to authority, that's a huge one that comes up, whether it was being really disconnected from the body, whatever it was, when I began to unpack a few more of these stories, we could clearly see that these were themes that perhaps had played out in their lives, before the
Mm.
actual, we walk into the birth room. So, the I guess two places I began to see is one, how do we help support families to take this extraordinary journey with information and understanding about the power of this transformation? Now, it's, pretty common that nobody really cares about birth or wants to think about birth until you're about to do it. And then all of a sudden you just become consumed with it. And then we have to look at, what is the information we've been fed, what sits in the subconscious mind around what we believe birth to be. And the reality is, for low risk women, birth is a normal, natural process. Our bodies are designed to
Yeah.
actually do it. But there's a whole lot that often gets in the way. We know that trauma can get in the way. We know where we choose to give birth can get in the way. The support we have around us can get in the way. Fear can play a big part. There's so many huge elements with it. And so what I really began to see was that there's so much more to it than just, okay, you're going to have a baby, next week sometime. And that preparation can be so powerful. And then also the birth experience, who is supporting you, who is that guide. A lot these days we put a lot of pressure on partners or men to be the main support person. And the reality is, most men never have given birth before. It's usually their first time in this whole experience, and we expect them to know everything around, how to advocate for their support. And that's why continuity care can be really important. It's why doulas can be very important. It's why often women seek other women who've done it before them to say, show me how to do this huge rite of passage. So we see the impact of support as well. And then I think afterwards, when we're looking at how that then, if we have had a traumatic experience, and again, trauma can be all sorts of different things. It can be things like obstetric violence, it can be feeling not supported and not feeling safe, it can be actual medical things that happen to us. It can be, but I would actually say that the medical trauma of actually things happening to us isn't actually what usually women carry trauma around. It's often more around not feeling supported, not feeling seen,
Yeah,
being out of
exactly.
control. All those themes can have an impact on then when we step into that next place of motherhood. And I think in an ideal world, we go through this rite of passage of birth, and we have to face ourselves in birth because we're doing something really physically challenging. Equally, it might be that you choose to have an elective cesarean. There's still fear within that. We still have to face ourselves. We still have to surrender. And part of it is, being able to take this step into motherhood in a way that we feel connected to ourselves and connected to our babies. Now, we know that interventions can play a huge part in that. We know that drugs can sometimes play a part in our hormonal cascade that happens in being able to bond with our babies. There's so many things that can go contribute to it. And so then we've kind of stepped into this next place of motherhood. And then when we are sitting there and our body is in shock and is in trauma, then that is very hard to often attune and connect to our babies when we are sitting in another space where we're still trying to process what happened and still trying to gauge, is there still threat going on for me right in this moment? So, I often used to joke that women should be able to give birth. They should be able to go away for a week and process the actual birth and then come back and pick up their baby and mother. Now, we know that that's not ideal because we want mums and babies to be together. But
Yeah.
how powerful would it be to have the actual space to go away and go, right, what was there for me? What happened? How do I navigate and process a lot of this? And a lot of women don't get the chance to, because all of a sudden you just have to step right into motherhood. And if you have a well baby, then usually the narrative from our culture is that, oh, well, it was the birth, it's fine, your baby's healthy, it's all
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yet often it's not okay. And I've worked with women who 50, 60 years ago had babies and are still carrying the story around what happened in
Yeah.
their birth because they never got to debrief it, they never got to express how it felt for them, all those kind of things. So birth is a huge thing, particularly that first step into parenthood. It's massive because what we ideally know is that babies need deep attunement. Babies can also carry trauma in their bodies as well. So to be
Oh,
able to
they do.
have,
Sure.
yeah, to be able to have holding for families, mothers, partners, and babies to be able to help their bodies process what's going on, or what that rite of passage was, is a huge thing, because then hopefully it allows everyone's body to process what's happening, their nervous system to settle, and then we can actually move forward in, being a family. But we don't often know that we need that. We don't often have access to the support to do that. So there's a lot there. And I think we look at even bigger than that from a systemic point of view. We look at what's happening in early learning at the moment. We look at what's happening in schools at the moment. I mean, to me, I'm like, we can trace a lot of this back to pregnancy and birth,
Oh, yeah,
around
for
how the
sure.
mother was treated, how she was feeling, the birth experience, the postnatal experience, and then what it sets up from there. So it's big.
Yeah.
We need, I always say, if we are going to change the world, it has to start with the families. It has to start with, how do we support our families to to feel held and process what's going on.
Exactly. And, like so many things were coming to mind, as you were talking. And like so much of trauma comes back to not feeling held in
Mm.
the moment, not feeling supported. There's a book by Peter Levine called I think it's In an Unspoken Voice. I think it's in that one where he talks about a car accident that he was in when he was riding his bike, and the first responder was kind of like, okay, don't move, blah, 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 blah. And he could feel his system go into brace, into kind of freeze. But then a lady came along who was walking by. I think she was also a nurse. It's been a long time since I read it, so I may get
Yeah.
some of the details wrong. And she came and put her hand on him and said, you're safe. I'm here with you.
Yeah.
And his system was able to shake and start letting that response complete and move through. And he has this quote like trauma is what happens in the absence of an empathic witness.
You absolutely. Yeah.
Exactly
Yeah.
what you're
And
saying,
yeah. Yeah. And it's a very common thing for women. I often talk about this when I'm talking to educators actually about children expressing feelings, trauma, all those kind of things. And I often say, if any of you have given birth here, particularly if it was a fast birth, you may have found that you shook uncontrollably
Mm.
after giving birth, and so many of them nod. And I'm like, that is not because you were cold. That's because your body's like, whoa, what just happened then? That was really
Yeah.
intense. And I'm trying to catch up with what's going on here. I know the book you're talking about, and I remember reading it. And literally 2 days later, I had this experience where my daughter, who was maybe 8 or 9 at the time, was playing with a friend outside. And then I just hear this, like, Lael, come quickly. And I ran outside, and my daughter knelt on the hammock. And as she knelt on the hammock, it swung backwards, and then she fell on the concrete on her arm. And as I get out there, she's laying there. And as soon as I saw her, her eyes are wide, like she's white, like I'm like, she's in shock. And
Yeah.
I just finished reading this book, and I was literally like, don't touch her. Like, I was like, don't move. And I was like, I'm going to get a pillow for your head. And I just put a pillow underneath her. And I literally just said, my love, I am here, and just do whatever your body needs to do. And
Yeah.
so she instantly started shaking, and then she'd cry, and then she shook, and then she cried.
Beautiful.
And for probably like 15 minutes, I just sat there and let her do it. And then after that 15 minutes, she took this massive deep breath. All the color came back to her face. And she smiles at me and she goes, I think I broke my arm. And I was like, yeah, I think you have. Let's go to the hospital.
Yeah.
And we literally got up and then we moved, right? And I was like, it was exactly what had been spoken about in that
Yeah.
book
Wow. Fascinating.
in that moment, that I was aware enough to go, I'm just going to hold space here because your body is so clever and it knows what to do. And I'm going to just hold that space for you to be able to do it. And it was extraordinary. And then we went on, and she, had to have x-rays, but there was no alarm or distress about it. We'd done what we needed to do in that moment of that
Yeah,
incredible shock.
exactly. So it's like usually, what happens is that cycle gets interrupted.
Yeah.
And you spoke about the systems, like, hospitals itself have a like we relate to them as something being wrong with us,
Yes.
So it's not an ideal place to have a baby in general because of that relationship to hospitals. Like we're sick, something's wrong. So we're already, you go into a hospital, you feel a bit uncomfortable,
Yeah, yeah.
Nervous
But
system's already in brace.
yeah, but then it's also, what's interesting about that is, for some people, particularly with birth, hospital is a safe place. So even though, yes, we can equate it with sickness, there's safety for some people in having medical staff around. And I
Yeah.
used to find this working in birth, that home birth is definitely not for everyone. And sometimes I would attend a birth, and it wasn't that often, but there was a few births I went to where they had planned a home birth, and the labor just wasn't progressing, and we're just like, what's going on here? And so we transferred to hospital, and the moment we got to hospital, labor just took off, and they had their baby. And it was interesting because it was like there was something in their nervous system that said it's actually safe
Relapsed when there
right
was
here.
medical stuff.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think it's really important when we look at something like birth that we actually tune into, what does that feel like for you?
Person, it's
What
unique.
is
Yeah.
safety for you? And that looks different for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. So we all have unique kind of fingerprints of what feels safe to us and what helps us to relax, So
Yes.
definitely thanks for pointing that out. And it's kind of like our system is very medicalized, like which like and sterile and can lose that sense of human to human connection.
Yeah.
Like when a baby's distressed, like, an infant, and its system's spiking, into a stress response, cortisol's pumping through its body, and it doesn't have that capacity to come out
Mm.
of that on its own. And it's only through, touch, kind of pre-verbal forms of communication from
Mm.
mother or father or regulated caregiver that it helps the baby to come out of it. And it comes back to it. That's like how primal it is for us to feel held.
Yes.
So you gave that example then, when some women ended up going to the hospital,
Mm.
they might have an association with the medical staff having, previous
Mm.
experiences of feeling safe.
Yes.
That's so then that experience is communicating with their nervous system and something relaxes, you know.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
so
Yeah.
that happens for the babies, but then so we need to create that same holding environment, you know, for anyone in any kinds of trauma. You know, this is what we're talking about. It's not just specific to birth, but it's universal
Anyway,
forms of
well,
trauma.
it's, I mean, you look at that in our education system, you look at it in our medical system, you look at it everywhere. It's needed everywhere because we don't live in a trauma informed society. We live in a society where we are deeply shut down and connect and disconnected from our bodies, and then that's how we interact with each other. And I think it's, I mean, it's a wonder. It's, I just think sometimes it's extraordinary that we get through days, you know, when we think about what we're carrying and how we bump up against each other and then we project onto other people, and we're all kind of coming from these places of protection. It's pretty huge. And then we go have judgment, and like it's a lot, you know, being a human these days and what we're carrying is a lot. And I don't know, I find like a lot of my work these days is so much around helping adults to firstly try and find that place of coming home to themselves and realizing that, you know, so much of their story or where they've been has come from that place of trying to keep themselves safe. And that's what other people do too. So when we can, you know, I often say that if we could see a person and then look around behind them and see their whole story of where they, what they have journeyed to get to where they are, then we would not have judgment for anyone, because we would look at someone and go, my God, the strength in you to survive what you went through, or the incredible courage you've had to transform where you've been. We would have nothing but compassion for each other. But I think we are not taught about that. I think we're not modeled that in our families of origin. I think we're still catching up to that even that knowledge base that, you know, we are all coming from this place of protection, trying to keep ourselves safe. And I don't know, my big hope is that the more we can understand this, the more compassion we would have for other people, because compassion is the way that we heal. You know, it's through, as you're saying, a loving, compassionate other human that will sit with someone and say, I see you and I don't judge you. And I honor the story and the path that you've walked. And I am here to hold that really safe space so you can process what is present for you.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
is power, right? It's powerful because it's something that we all deeply want. Our core, deep instinct is to be seen, it is to be deeply seen and acknowledged for who we are. And most people have never had that in their lives, ever.
Mm.
And so, of course, we then see, you know, that we then go out into the world with these imprints of it's not safe to be seen and I have to protect myself at all costs. And then we play that out. I
Mm.
remember a client of mine many years ago, she would come for a session and all she wanted to do was lay on my couch and cry and have me just touch, hold,
Yeah.
you know, stroke her head and
How?
just hold her there. And we did that maybe for like 3 months. And she would say to me, it is the first time ever in my life that it has been safe to cry and I don't feel judged. I feel loved. And so she had to come and cry for a long time. As she did that, what was extraordinary is, you know, her whole system began to change to create a story that says it's actually safe to do this now.
Yeah,
And then as she did that, she then actually then had the capability to do that then for her children, because she
exactly.
hasn't been
Yeah.
able to do it for her children. So she needed to have a lived, healed experience of that to then be able to sit with her children's discomfort and feelings so she could connect with them. And, you know, that was, you know, some of the most profound but look simple work ever. But it takes a spaciousness within you to be able to meet that in someone else.
Exactly. And it's, you know, like I love that you touched on that because that then becomes internalized and we can offer it to our children or to others. And so, you know, it's unfortunately, it's not enough to just know this stuff and read about it. Like the deep healing work it takes, you know, to be able to do it. And it's like I work in this field. It's all I've ever done, you know. But prior to that, I just was in addiction and all that sort of stuff. And then I had children, and I knew all this stuff, but and still now I don't do it perfectly. Like having children is very difficult, and some of the old nervous system reactions are very
Yeah.
entrenched.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but like as I've unraveled my own imprints and met deeper aspects of the stuff that I'm carrying, the more I'm able to offer that to my children, And I think that's a huge thing generationally, because like, say someone has a like kind of ideal, I'm not going to say perfect because there's no such thing, an ideal childhood where they feel really held by their mother and father. Their environment's nurturing, safe. There's a container that they
Mm.
can kind of relax and surrender into that helps their nervous system to regulate and return back to calm and safe. That then gets internalized and it translates in the way they relate to other people, throughout their lives. It translates into all the decisions they make. But then the next generation, when they have kids, it translates over to their kids. But unfortunately, the opposite is also true. When the environment is stressful, there's a lack of holding, there's disconnect, then that gets internalized. The lack of
Absolutely.
support gets internalized.
Yeah.
And then they have kids, they can't just say, like, read a book, oh, I need to be nurturing, because their whole nervous system from head to toe has oriented around survival. They may not want to, but their
Yeah.
nervous system's going to have different ideas and still be in threat. And so it takes a lot of work, and the amount of work always depends on someone's developmental history and how much they're carrying, but it takes a lot of work to be able to actually
Yeah.
turn that switch off, contain our triggers, because it's not bad to get triggered. It's just whether we can contain it and
Yeah.
regulate it,
Yeah.
and bring our system back to calm and safe and repair the ruptures,
Yeah.
come back to that place of being able to support. But
Mm.
it's an internalization process, and one that isn't just like as simple as changing a thought.
Oh, I second everything that you're saying, and I see that all the time. And I say to parents these days, you guys are some of the bravest parents that I've ever met because you have access to this information now and you're wanting to do it differently. And you are the first generation of being willing to feel in a deeper
Yeah,
way and
exactly.
to hold space for your children's feelings. And at the same time, you're having to reparent yourself for what
Yeah,
you never got. And this is huge. And, I feel very blessed that my children are old enough now to see how that sits. And they're not parents yet, but all three of my kids work with children. So they're two of them are disability support workers, and the other one works at my school. And what I have witnessed in my children is their ability to hold space for kids is beyond. It's better than most adults that I work with because they have a lived, embodied experience of it. Because my husband and I worked really hard to hold space for their feelings and their anger and help them learn how to express it and feel it. And, through, just the loving boundaries we set and what we did, like, we really were like, we want you to be deeply in touch with who you are. And so, what is beautiful to witness now is their embodiment of it that is innate, because exactly as you said, it's how they were raised. That's the blueprint they got. And
yeah,
so, a lot of my second book that's coming out soon, which is called Own Your Story, is exactly this: is it's all about the imprints we received as children and how they impact who we are as adults. And the beauty of it is once we kind of identify, oh, yeah, that's the messaging I got, and that's what I received in my family of origin, that's what I internalized. When we begin to understand it, firstly, not make it wrong, not judge it, just be like, that's my story, then we can actually begin to shift what we do want it to look like. And that's where we do the work and we change. But I absolutely acknowledge exactly what you're saying. It's not always easy because when you are the first in your lineage to actually start doing this work, it's a huge thing. It's a really
yeah,
huge thing, but it is one of the most powerful gifts you can give to your children. And, it can carry forward. And look, I see this. I was very blessed with a very conscious mother who was into spirituality and awareness long, long, long before it was cool at all. And so I got raised kind of with an awareness. Even I remember as a 9 or 10 year old, having, feeling frustrated about my friends and stuff. And my mom really teaching me that nobody can make us feel something. It's our interpretation of what we feel and being able to tune into what my body was needing and what it was telling me. And, so I feel that I've been able to do this work in the world in a way. And yes, I've had to do all my stuff and have to work through my own traumas as well. But I feel like my mum carved a bit of a path for me, which I know that many people don't have. So I feel very blessed that I was shown a different level of awareness from a younger age that has made it a lot easier for me, I think, to understand, or to have a default setting, which is, what is this about? Where am I here? Instead of being that it's not fair and it's everyone else's fault and the projection that we go to, my default as a young kid was, oh, what's happening for me right now? What do I need to tune into?
So that capacity to introspect, to do a U-turn of attention and have a relationship with your internal world was internalized from your relationship with your mother.
Yeah, yep, yep. And
Amazing.
I'm,
Yeah.
yeah, very grateful. And I am so aware that I am in the absolute minority. And I've
Yeah.
listened to thousands of stories of people, and
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm definitely very wealthy in the sense of that I was gifted some deep unconditional love and some wisdom and awareness from my mum. Not so much my dad. My dad's a beautiful man, but he wasn't interested in any of that. So I had a different contrast with him. But to have actually just one person as a guide who
Yeah.
is holding that space for you and asking those questions is incredibly powerful.
Exactly. That gets internalized, especially if it's the mother, like there's a theory, it's in object relations theory where they say that the internal representation of the mother gets internalized. And that becomes part of the healthy and secure attachment. So the more positive experiences and, nurturing experiences we have with our mother, that internalized representation of the mother
Mm,
comes with us. And so we leave our mother and then we come back and leave our mother and can go a bit further, but she's always with us. The image, the representation of her is internalized and then regulates our nervous system.
mm,
And then our personality starts to orient itself around that feeling of safety. And this is, in contrast, developmental trauma is when we don't have that safe, nurturing ground to come back to. And then the personality orients itself around surviving the threat,
mhm,
surviving the environment. And
mm,
you just said, you're the minority. It's, I'm of the perspective that everyone has trauma to
mm,
varying degrees. Everyone has some forms of developmental
mm.
trauma. It's not binary, but more like a spectrum
Yeah, for sure.
that we all fall on. And like it's amazing that you got to have that experience. But as you said, it's not most people's experience. And so the work is really about learning to reorient our nervous system to come out of that threat. And so much of our personality can be latched onto it,
Yeah.
personality traits and who we think we are. But and so, because I see developmental trauma not as just like a distressing event, but more about how our identity formed.
But also, the development trauma can come from what we didn't receive,
Exactly,
which
neglect.
is not just about, and neglect in the really, and what we would not probably consider neglect, like in the sense of, yes, we were fed and we had a house to live in and a warm bed, but the neglect towards the emotional holding of our feelings. So some of the more nuances of that I work with a lot is when I say to parents, so when you think back to being a kid and you got angry or got upset, how did your parents respond? And so most people's reaction was, well, I was sent to my room, perhaps I was smacked, I was yelled at, maybe I got mocked, or perhaps I just got ignored. Now that core stuff around, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm really sad, and nobody meeting you in that's a trauma, right? That sets up a
Yeah, yeah,
story
exactly.
in our system that basically says it's not okay for me to express who I am. So what do? We learn to internalize that and numb it, which is the repression that we get to, which is, as I'm sure what you talk about with addictions and stuff that we do. I can't afford to feel, so I have to do something to not make myself feel. Or it becomes anger and aggression, and then we kind of try and power over others and we feel unseen, and we turn it out that way. Whereas in an ideal world, when a child is angry, upset, frustrated, an adult, a calm adult, is able to come over, get down low, look them in the eye and say, tell me more. Like, yes, I see you. What else? And they're able to bring that level of presence and understanding to say, don't cry and don't be like this. And you don't need to be that upset. Don't be ridiculous. Like, we are able to meet the child in their feelings so the child can feel them, express them in a healthy way, and then let them go and return to that baseline. So then they don't have to carry it around. Yet, and again, I've worked with a lot of families who grew up in safe households, right? And again, no fault to their parents were just doing what was done to them, but
Exactly.
not having the emotional safety to be met in their feelings, because for many generations before us, we've grown up in this behaviorism paradigm, which basically says, I'll reward you when you're good and you're compliant, and when you're bad, I'm going to take something away. So we learn as a young child that it's actually not okay for me to be sad. And it's not okay for me to be angry. And it's not okay for me to speak up and say, hey, that does not feel good for me. We're taught to be compliant. And I say to parents all the time, the goal is not to raise good boys and good girls. It's not. The goal is to raise children who are deeply connected to themselves, who know and have the tools to express themselves in healthy, safe ways.
Yeah.
That's what we want to work towards. So, coming back to the trauma piece, it's often what we didn't get that sets up some of these stories within us, particularly around emotional intelligence and expression of feelings, because it's the subtle cues that we received at home that said, do not be upset. Or
Yeah.
it's not okay for you to cry because I'm deeply uncomfortable with your feelings. And of course, compassion to our parents, because that's what would have been done to them. So
Exactly.
there is no blame. There is just often a lack of awareness around how, as humans, we actually all have this beautiful innate healing within us to process our feelings, and we need guidance on how to do that in a healthy way. It's not okay to just take your feelings and spray it over everyone. It's our responsibility to be mindful about how we work with it, but we're often not being taught or guided in how to do that. And that, I think, is the for me, most of the adults I work with today, that's the pain point.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I resonate with everything you said, and like for me, it hasn't been something that like I go to a session an hour a week and then just go back out into the world and forget about it. It's like real time, moment to moment kind of yoga practice of presence, like and attuning to myself. And, like I know all this stuff and I practice it and I live it and I still screw up like as a dad, like especially with my son, he mirrors stuff back to me, and I can be very aware of it, as it comes up, but I just might say something. It's like, that's my dad's voice, coming out of my mouth. And, so like there's room for mistakes as well, I have to make room for mistakes in my experience. Otherwise I fall into a big shame spiral, and so
And I
something I make sure I do is repair
Yeah,
when I make a
beautiful.
mistake.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think I love that you're saying that, because there is no perfect in parenting. Like, we're all going to mess up. And what I've found too, even as my kids are older now, stuff that I was, you know, I'm thinking, oh yeah, that's going to be a trauma. Like, things that happen, and I think, shit, that's going to be big. I've got to keep an eye on that. And my kids are like, yeah, no, it's nothing. And then there's things that I think were fine and great, and they're like, remember when you did that? And I'm like, what? That wasn't even bad. Like, I'm kind of, it's all in the eye of the beholder, right? Like, it's their perception of what happens and what's going on for them. So I say to parents all the time, you can try and troubleshoot everything. You are not going to get it right. You're not meant to. We are imperfectly, fabulously human. And so, what we ideally want to do is just keep trying to come back to attunement with our children,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
that when we see there's a little expression on their face, or we see something off, we're like, oh, I wonder what's going on there. And we make ourselves available energetically for them to bring to us what it is that they might be working with, or something that's going on. Now, I guess the challenge of that, and this is, I think, the biggest challenge I see today, is that we are all so busy and so not present in our bodies that we miss these attunement cues from our children. So we are all up trying to do everything because we're living in a pretty stressed environment,
Mm.
and we don't have enough slow or connection to be able to tune in. And so, of course, children need that attunement connection to be like, oh, here's what's on my heart, here's what's on my mind, here's what's going on. But when we're racing from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, we don't have that. And I remember early on, I kind of only came to this way of parenting. My oldest was 8, and then my middle one was 5, and then I had a baby. And I really just, this is when I started to really understand more about trauma and holding space for feelings. And I remember it dawning on me going, whoa, this is a bit like a full-time job, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
my job is to just be deeply present.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to my husband, there's a bit of repair that needs to happen here, because we were doing the best we can. We were just so young. But I'm like, I really do need to hold space for the kids to be able to allow them to process what might still be stuck or what needs to come. And so I remember going, this has got to be my job right now, for these years to be deeply present to them. And in order to do that, I had to really take care of myself. So I had to make sure I was meeting my needs, doing my own inner work so that I had spaciousness to meet them in it. And that was tricky. We were a one income family, we weren't earning much money, but I was like, I just know that this is probably the best investment we're going to make here
Sure.
to be really available for them in the ways that I want to emotionally so that they can process what is there. And it wasn't easy, it was hard. And so many days it was boring. And I'm just like, my God, I want to get out in the world and do my things. But I actually also just knew if I can master this or I can really learn the art of deep presence and attunement with my children, then anything from that is going to be easy because it is one of the most challenging things that we can do to sit in the fire with someone, to be deeply present in their anger and their upset, to use play and all those kind of things to help them process some bigger things that was going on. It was huge and it was a lot, but being on the other side of it, I think it is the greatest thing I could have done as a
Yeah.
parent.
Well, all of that, as we've said, gets internalized, it's amazing, but it is so rare, our culture doesn't support it, like our society doesn't support it, and often our own nervous systems really get in the way of it, but and I just wanted to just circle back quickly to that rupture and repair part, because I find working, because I work with parents also, work with all types of trauma. And something I find is when people hear all this kind of knowledge, is they'll try and avoid any kind of rupture and tie themselves into this kind of existential knot,
Yes.
of repression, not allow their own anger to move through or their own feelings, and just try and create like bubble wrap,
Yeah.
to not traumatize their kids. But I'd love to hear your perspective on this, that the rupture is actually important, It's
Absolutely.
kind of like, in the forest, in the drought,
Yeah.
that's when the roots grow deep, So
Yeah.
the stress
Yeah.
just as important as the relax, because that's how the nervous system learns to regulate itself. That's how it builds resilience to
Yeah.
stress.
Yeah.
Right? If it's just bubble wrapped and avoid stress altogether and avoid ruptures, then there's no resilience built to
And
experience.
also, what I'd add to that too is our children are completely tuned into our nervous system.
Yeah.
So if you are like, I'm fine, right? But you're actually seething and
Yeah.
frustrated and angry, your child's like, I don't know. And often what happens is a child will come to a parent and check in. Are you okay? And the parent, if they're feeling angry, but they go, I'm fine, I'm fine. What happens is the child goes, my intuition's telling me you're not fine, but you're telling me are okay. So maybe my intuition's wrong. And this is where kids begin to distrust their gut and their intuition, and that's not what we want. You
Mm.
are much better off saying, I am so angry today, and that's
Yeah.
mine. And I need to go and yell at the trees, or I need to go and rip up paper, or I need to go and push something hard, or I need to go and shake my body, or, we have to model healthy ways to feel our feelings. And the reality is, our kids know, they know already anyway, right? Because we are all part of this kind of energetic bubble that we're all tuning into each other with, even if we are unaware of it. So we are much better off being honest and saying, I feel like this and that's mine, right? Now, what happens when we do that is it actually helps children go, oh, okay, the parents being real, the
Yeah.
parents being honest. Because what is very confusing for kids is when they're sensing one thing and a parent's saying something else.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where the mismatch is. And so, in our realness, we are all going to reach a point where we yell. We all have, I have yelled. I have done things that I'm like, whoa, that was not
Yeah,
not
me
cool,
too.
right? But because we're human and we get stretched and we reach capacity and we don't have the support we need, or we have our traumas coming up. And exactly as you say, it's in those moments we might explode. And then the most important part is once we have found our center again, to come back and repair to our children, say, I am so sorry for speaking to you that way. I am so sorry for yelling. That is on me.
Yeah.
And what do we need to do to repair? Do you need to tell me? Would you like to tell me in your words how that felt for you? Now, that's a powerful thing to say to a child. So the child can say, I don't like it when you yell and you're a mean mummy. And to be able to sit there and go, yep, I hear you. It takes a lot of courage, but it's important for our kids to express how that felt for them. Like, do you need to have a cry about how that's scary? And they might be like, yeah. And I'm like, cool, come here, let me hold you while you do that. We want to, keep working on our capacity to know that when we make a mistake, we can own it and then sit with our children, because not only does it repair is important for our relationship. It also teaches our children how to repair, and that's powerful. So they also know that they are developing those skills to do it. And I also want to say it is not an easy thing to do, because often what happens is we grew up in families where our parents never repaired for us. So we
Yeah.
don't actually have a healthy example of what apologizing in a repair actually looks like. The amount of times, in my immersions that I run with parents, and I ask them the question, did your parents ever apologize to you? The amount of people are like, nah, never. I've never heard my dad say
Yeah.
sorry. I've never had them take responsibility for it. I'm like, so that's huge, right? And in us changing that story and that imprint.
Exactly. And, as children, we turn it back on ourselves. Like, if we don't have, if we aren't given the context, it becomes a core belief, what's wrong with me?
Mhm.
And, you were just talking about um, like anger and having outbursts and stuff to like there's a fine line, in my own practice, like of being able to feel and contain and allow a response, a reactive, visceral, felt sense of anger to move through my system with neither repressing it
Mm.
nor acting it out.
Yeah.
Right? And that is very difficult,
Very.
and it's a practice of presence, and like
Yeah.
I'm the same. I have, yelled at my kids, like I've had moments of outbursts, but coming back to that repair is so important. Like that's been foundational,
I
of
think the part that you say there, which is so vital, is catching it,
yeah,
is the awareness to be like, I'm having a reaction in my body right now. And even just last Friday, something happened, and it's rare that I actually get triggered. Like, I have done a lot of work and live a pretty anchored life these days. So it's if something comes, I can be aware of it and I can usually work with it. So it's rare that I actually physically get triggered. And I felt so angry and powerless last Friday. I watched myself start to shake and I was like, whoa, oh, this is huge, right? And so I know enough to go, this is totally mine.
yeah,
This is my reaction. This is an old reaction. I could feel it already. I felt like a teenager. And I was like, all this teenage powerlessness stuff rose in those moments. And so I was like pacing around my lounge room, shaking my body, just being like, whoa, this is big. Okay, let's go. Let's move this. I need it. And it took me a good 20 minutes or so to move, to talk, to cry, to just move the feeling until then I felt it pass within me, to be able to be like, oh, yeah, that's old. I can feel that. That's a really old thing that has just been touched on there, and what a gift that is. So,
yeah,
and then I was lucky I had someone I could talk to that just kind of held space for me to work through the other pieces that were sitting there. But, when we can't catch it, then what do? We make it our partner's fault for not putting the washing away, or we yell at our kids because they won't get in the bath. That's the challenge, is that we often feel so uncomfortable with it, but we're trying to dissipate the bigness and the tension in our body. And so we look for a way to try and release it. And that's usually with picking a fight with someone.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's exactly what I was saying, that fine line of being able to feel it directly without repressing it nor acting it out. And,
Yeah.
we touched on repressing our feelings as parents isn't helpful either because it creates that inauthenticity and that dissonance in the relationship. And I remember when my kids were a bit younger, like I would get these rage surges through my body. It was like fire, like instinctual rage, would come up because they'd put me in this position where I'm powerless, and so it would really hit my developmental trauma. And I remember like when it would come up, I'd start to pretend to be a dinosaur and like growl and roar and like clench my fists and
Yeah.
stomp around the room. And it was a way of like letting it move through in a non-threatening way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the intensity of it was really strong. It took a lot of work to get to the capacity where I could feel it,
Yeah.
Um,
And I often say to parents, this is the magic of children. Like, children are sitting there going, hey, Dad, I really need you to work through this piece here so you don't project it onto me. So I'm going to behave in a way that's going to activate that
yeah,
part.
yeah, yeah. Do it on purpose,
Yeah, they are. They're so clever. They're like, here's this piece.
Yeah,
Okay. And then what we often do in our culture is we turn to the child and we make the child wrong. If
yeah,
only you would behave this way. If only you would do this. Whereas actually, I often say all the time, if you're triggered, that's on you, right? If you are having a reaction or an activation, that is all you. And we have to look at that. We have to lean into, okay, well, is that because I'm tired and I haven't eaten anything, or I need a break, or I'm touched out? Like sometimes we react just because we need support. Sometimes it's stories that we tell ourselves around things, and sometimes it's tapping us into those older, deeper traumas that are needing to be felt and healed. That our children are like, hey, here's the gift for you. And, again, through all of those things, it takes the awareness to kind of tune in is what is here for me right now?
Yeah.
Where am I? What's going on? What am I needing in these moments? What is being activated within it? And I love your dinosaur story because it's a beautiful way to still try and stay in connection with them, but own what you need to do it. That's so brilliant. Um, and again, modeling to
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
amazing. Next time they're angry, let's get the dinosaurs out, and we start stomping around and moving it. So, there's so much beauty in that. But yes, exactly as you say, Matt, it takes a lot to be able to firstly observe it, to be able to then act on it in a way that is helpful, not harmful. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this is big work, which is why we need to be so
Huge.
freaking kind to ourselves, and we need to be so compassionate to ourselves because again, we are doing something that was not modeled to us. We are changing a deeper imprint here, which is powerful, powerful work. And so we have to give ourselves grace, and we have to give ourselves a lot of acknowledgement for how we are moving the needle.
Exactly. We're swimming against the tide of, our individual story, the cultural story, the systems, the collective. Like it is big work. It's trauma, it permeates almost every level of those things. It does. And so it is no small
Yeah.
feat.
Yeah.
And so developing that capacity, as you said earlier, and this is the word I always come back to in our training, presence.
Yeah.
It's what
Yeah.
it's all about, our capacity to be present to what's happening within us, and then that translates in our ability to be present to our kids.
100%. Yeah. Yep. Yep. That's the goal. And, for me, I often talk about, we think it's about sending our kids to the right schools or feeding them the best food or getting them to play tennis, or actually it's us doing our work. That is the greatest legacy you can give your kids is, you processing and moving through your stuff so they don't have to carry it forward. That's
Exactly. Yeah.
that's the huge piece of it. And it's not something that's recognized in our culture and our society, but my God, it's everything.
Yeah. Hopefully, through people like you and talking about this stuff, more and more people it become, hopefully, eventually it becomes a core value, like of our culture, because it is core importance, to well-being. Our whole culture would change if we could get this one thing.
Yeah, yeah, wouldn't it? I fear we have a long way to go,
Me
but I
too.
have hope. I have optimism. I see the shifts in parents. I see there's so much more consciousness now these days than even when I started working in birth 20 years ago, to where we are now. I think it's amazing that we have access to the information that we do, and all the times that we can hear it again and again and again in podcasts and videos and books and all that kind of stuff. The more we hear it, the more we begin to understand it. I mean, trauma wasn't even a word that people used until we had started COVID 5 years ago, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden,
Yeah.
trauma suddenly becomes like, oh, what is this trauma thing? And then we're
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's what we're all living right now.
Yeah.
And so, that's where I think we start to see it shift a little bit, and there's some more awareness. So, I have hope. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. It's just, it's like I said, it permeates every level and it's gonna take a lot. And I think the more people that work through their own trauma, it has an effect on the collective, whether we believe in kind of spiritual stuff or not. Like our nervous systems communicate
Yeah.
unconsciously. We walk into a room, we can feel whether someone's a threat or someone's safe. And the more people that metabolize their trauma. It's not just being passed on to their kids, but it's being passed on to the collective.
Yes.
It's creating a dent in this big mass of suffering,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
exists
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
all of us.
Totally. Totally. I agree with you. And I think, you know, we're at a time, I think, on this planet where that's the way we've always had to, that's ideally the direction we've wanted to head. But I think now more than ever,
Yeah.
we need it to do this for our future.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a perfect spot to finish up. But thanks so much for joining us. I really enjoyed that conversation. We'll have to get you back on at some point.
My pleasure.
Uh,
Yeah.
but
Great. I mean, I really honor the work that you're doing too, Matt, in the world, and your story of, the embodiment of it, of where you've come from and what you are doing. It's really powerful. I think it gives such hope to everybody. And I also just think that you know, this experience of being human is huge, right? It's hard being a human. I often say that. Yet when we can find those anchor points of people,
mm,
who are holding the light for something different, it's really powerful. So, I just want to acknowledge all the beautiful work that you do.
thank you, and you too. Like I said, your everything you teach has been a big influence on my style of parenting. Same as my wife. We've
Beautiful.
done a lot of your courses and stuff together also.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Matt.
All right, thanks so much. If anyone wants more information, we'll put the links to Lael's stuff below. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening.